I'm Uyen. I own a restaurant called Beau in Los Angeles. I'm also the chef there, which serves Vietnamese street food and comfort food. I was born in Vietnam, in Saigon, and I currently live in Los Angeles.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over the world.
What does it mean to be Vietnamese to you nowadays?
I'm very proud of my heritage, of where I come from, and I think the meaning of being part of also a refugee community has strong significance to me, considering nowadays with these many different refugee crises happening across the world, through war, through climate issues, through economic issues, that I feel that it's very important to me, my heritage of where I come from, and I often channel it a lot when I'm just operating my business or when I'm trying to engage in society, that it's a big part of who I am.
This idea of being a refugee and being very aware of this, as we'll talk about in this episode, when did you think you started to kind of pay attention to that?
I think that for me, it started very early. I moved from Vietnam to the US when I was 7. We came as um, through the humanitarian operation program. We call it HAPO because my dad was a prisoner of war for almost 6 years, which then when he got out and the US came up with a program where you and your immediate family can come essentially as refugees to the United States, that I felt very strongly connected to Vietnam because I had significant memories of it. Then coming to America with issues of integrating into society, of not knowing English yet and remembering what it felt like, try to learn it, of having my family kind of come in waves, having come before that, and then also after that, and kind of anchoring ourselves in the Los Angeles and Orange County area, that I've always felt very much part of the immigrant experience, I think, and part of the immigrant experience where you're not necessarily leaving the country because you don't want to be there, but leaving because you feel like you don't necessarily have the opportunities and felt like you needed to go somewhere else in order to find those. And I think my parents felt that very strongly when they came here and, kind of started at the bottom again.
Yeah, that experience of, like from your family or my family, it's very different because I think, coming out of the the camps, the re-education camps, you are branded as something, your family's branded as something. The social implications are different for people of that time period to come out of the camps because you're branded as a Nguyen at the time, which is your whole family. You can't really, there's no upward mobility at that point, right?
Yeah, and my dad was um, an administrator in Pleiku, which is kind of like in the Central
Mhm.
Highlands. And he was a city administrator, and his job actually was to work with the multiple ethnic communities, of which there are many in Vietnam, to kind of show
Mm.
them what fair trade looks like. And so that they weren't being taken advantage of. So he had this very sort of like social justice oriented
Mm.
administrative job. But because he worked in the government, in the South Vietnamese government, essentially, that's what prompted him to be put into the re-education camps, which, he doesn't talk about a lot. But when he does, there are these just stories of like being in the jungle and like having to build your own prison shelters, essentially, a lot of disease, a lot of starvation. And it's one of those things where, that stuff gets embedded into
Yeah.
you, I think. And even when you're out of that environment, and my sister was born either right before, actually right before he went. And so for the first 6 years of her life, my mom is raising my sister on her own essentially, and then taking like coal fuel trucks through the jungle to visit my dad when she can. And so that, it's just sort of like part of my family's history, that even though we're in the United States, it's sort of so formative, I think. And part of, like, even when you leave and you're still in Vietnam, I think, it was hard to, and I can't put words into my parents' mouths because I couldn't imagine what they went through, but I think it's hard to just sort of try to reintegrate yourself into that society, and trying to feel like satisfied and feeling like not a sense of, anger or bitterness, you know, towards the people
Yeah.
who are leading your government or your society.
An interesting point that it's tangential kind of to this conversation, but an interesting point is what you just said about like anger towards the government. That word that I just used, "ngụy," is the way that they branded the former government. That word is sort of outlawed now. Like it's not allowed to be used to talk about the other side because it creates a political sort of rift between the Viet Kios that come back and the I mean we are children of Nguyen, right? And
Mhm.
so now that there's this sort of like I don't know if it's a formal policy or but it's not, that word is not used, no longer used, and it's outright banned in the press. So it's very interesting how these things affect millions of people, and at the same time they can just be changed, and lives are changed radically as a result of words that are used in generations ahead or before us.
Yeah, I had no idea that that word is sort of not being used anymore,
Yeah. But it makes
honestly.
sense because then you alienate the kids, the children of the kids, that the children of the people that banished, and they're the lifeblood of change and lifeblood of improvement alongside of the 98 million in country that, so we're all working in tandem to kind of make a better Vietnam all around the world. I feel like that's sort of like the overall mission of everybody now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love going back to Vietnam. Um, my my dad, I think, was very reluctant at first, especially. He waited until he got his citizenship papers, not even just the legal residency, but the citizenship,
You need to make
before
sure you
he
like,
considered going back,
yeah. Is that I'm
Um,
not joking around. I need to make sure I have a place to go. Somebody's taking me
yeah,
back. Yeah.
exactly. That, you know, and I I think that there's so much that we have, in common globally. The Vietnamese diaspora and folks in Vietnam right now that um, maybe, when did I come? Like 3 decades ago, that it was unclear, that
Yeah.
we'd be able to build this bond together.
Yeah, it's strange to think about. Like the first 10 years of my life, there was very little communication. In the first few years, like maybe 2, 3 years, there was no communication. Then it became like we had a communication, but it's very expensive communication. If you want to phone home, or letters would take months or weeks or whatever. So and things change. And now it's instant. My brother's lived there for 18 years. And, if I need anything, I literally just text him, like, hey, can you get on a call? And we're on the phone and we're talking. And that's been
Yeah,
going on for 18 years. It's crazy to think about
yeah,
it.
it is really crazy to think about.
Yeah.
I really could have not necessarily anticipated that world, like
Yeah.
Clinton going in the 90s and everything too, which is after we came to America. And then, it's sort of like, oh, wow, like this is happening now. Like it
Yeah.
was, that it was I guess it feels so long ago, but at that time when it was happening, I remember thinking like, wow, this is incredibly, incredibly significant and an incredibly thorny issue in Vietnamese America when it was happening as well.
Yeah. And I feel like all that stuff that's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, it's like I feel like I wish I could just get on a loudspeaker and tell everybody it's going to be okay eventually. I know a lot of people is dying, we've had millions of people die, but ultimately, they're living in a different time period where there's communication. You're not going to lose contact with your family. You're always going to be connected somehow through Facebook or some social media. We didn't have that, and it took us years to reconnect with family and get that all situated. But in Ukraine, it's like the modern. But I can't even believe this is happening right now.
It's
It's the craziest shit.
it's so crazy. It's sort
Yeah.
of like, like there are all these assumptions about lines people will not cross,
Yeah.
or lines that you don't think people will cross, that, in these modern times that we have these certain rules of decency and rules of how you just treat other human beings, and sovereignty of other people's self-determination. And it's sort of shocking,
Yeah.
to even be like, can't believe this is happening, and how can this S world that we live in, and yeah, I'm
It's
I think everyone's
bizarre.
wrapping
Yeah.
their heads around it.
So bizarre. When you were coming up, once you left Vietnam, and you got to the United States, what was going on in your mind?
um I remember that it was not necessarily a smooth trip. And we flew over, but at first we were put into sort of like a dormitory style place in Thailand, where they teach you, um, or where they help to like integrate you into American society, essentially by providing you with like foods they eat in America. And then I'm sure there's like paperwork and other things involved, but I was 7, so I don't really know that part. But then they had these screens that they would like project up things like, um, don't point with your middle finger in America, like, that's inappropriate because it's really bad thing. But if somebody does this to you, which in Vietnam means a really
Yeah.
bad thing, but in America means good luck, like don't get mad, like just stuff like that. And then like battered fried chicken, I remember that being just such like a delay, like a battered fried drumstick, it was like not something we ate in Vietnam at that point, but was something they were trying to introduce us to. So I remember this just being sort of a pretty bizarre part of like, what's happening here, like like where are we going, but this is important, why are we staying in like bunk beds with like all of these other families in a giant room, like.
Yeah.
And then we then my brother actually had a panic attack on the plane. He's a few years older, very active imagination, and he'd kind of like heard these kind of horror stories about America, etc. And so then we had to like land in somewhere in Japan, and the medics had to come and like rush him off the plane, and we all like ran after him through the airport because he was imagining that the chairs were coming up and flying towards him, and that we were going to go to this place, and it was just like dangerous and full of these. And so that was sort of kind of how it started. And then finally we got to the US after this, and it was like LAX, and we had family there like awaiting us, but it was just like just sparkling and like big, and it was at night, so there were just so many cars, which I just was not used to that. And since my family lived in West Covina at that point, it was a long drive from
Yeah.
LAX in traffic, and so you just see the tail lights on one side and the headlights on the others of the freeway, and then like I was motion sick, and I held out, and just about like 2-3 minutes before we actually got there. I was like, we have to pull over. So then I like threw up, and like just like 2-3 minutes before we got to the house. And so that was, I guess, the first, that was the trip from Vietnam to America. But I started, we came in September, so I started like second grade in elementary school,
What
basically.
year was that?
This was 1991.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So so I started second grade like pretty much at the beginning of the school year. So um that part did not feel strange. Like I didn't like, I like completed first grade. We had the summer, and then I was able to go and start second grade. Starting school in America is strange, but at least my sort of school cycle itself felt like, okay, this is just sort of the next step.
Right, right. So there was no kind of break or anything. It was just like you just got right into it.
Yeah, I guess so. I remember learning English and being very challenged by it. But, a lot of people say now, and they mean it as a compliment, and I guess it is one, but like, oh, like you don't have an accent, and I always found that to be sort of like, just like, oh, like, that's so good, and I just remember being a bit frustrated, still am, by that statement when anybody says it, and it's like, what do you mean? Like, what does a person, like, what's wrong with a person with an accent, kind of. And because, I have family who came a bit later than me, who, when you speak, you can tell they were born out of the country. And when I do, you can't, but it's something that, you can hear, but it's not necessarily something I think people should like be bringing up. It's like, this is better than that. And I feel like in the tone and the ways people say it, that's sort of
It's
how.
interesting because, like, and I understand where you're coming from, but, if you were Italian, people wouldn't say it, right? People are like, oh my God, your accent's so beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the thing that sort of like upsets me, is like, oh, you managed to like shed this old world where you would be marked as something lesser than, and you've adopted this new world fully in a way that we can't tell, that you used to be part of this lesser than group or something. And I think that's the part that, is sort of the discrimination when you have an accent that sounds like it comes from a certain country versus another one.
Well, I'm gonna openly admit that I used to think that. I used to think that, like, if I was sitting here with you 15 years ago, I would be like, "Oh, Win, I'm so impressed. You lost your accent, right?" And I've probably made that statement countless times in my life growing up, and measuring people, accordingly to that little nuance of like their language skills, you know. So I get what you mean by that. And I also
Mm-hmm.
think, there's so much implied meaning there from who says it, how it's being said, and all of it. And you're right. I mean, that has to eventually change. And I think that the answer to that is like the more we kick ass and the more we just do the work that we love doing, and we show the world and the humanity that is just human beings, that eventually those things sort of fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
At least that's what
Yeah.
I
And
hope. I don't know. That's my hope.
I, I, I hope so too. I hope so too. And, and then I try to kind of address it in myself. Like, I listen to a lot of radio, which is like, all you can hear is like the voice. Right.
Yes.
And I really try to listen and be like, okay, what is the intent of what this person is saying? What is the meaning of what they're saying? Like, it might not be packaged in a way that might be as, you know, academically rigorous, or it might not be packaged in a way that sounds like the news media's English, etc. But, kind of like their intention of what they're trying to communicate and what is the meaning here, and like what is the depth in that, you know. And I guess having kind of grown up the way I did, have always taken this extra step as a result to really, you know, not judge people by necessarily the words they use or how they say it, but what their intent in like trying to
Mm.
communicate.
You know, that's like another level of evolution to me, like that way of thinking that you just described, you know. And when I think about my work, sitting here talking to somebody like you, and I always like think like in another year I'm gonna listen back and I'm gonna think how cringy this is for me because you know, here's what happens. Inevitably, there's growth in everybody like me because I come from a very you know, a place of not knowing a whole lot, and then I get to sit with somebody like you who I've prepared these like superficial questions, and I think like I'm gonna do my best, and you know, and then I find out like holy shit, there's like layers to this person, like what you just said. There's intent. There's like these ideas that I'm not even scratching the surface with you, you know, and that's what scares the shit out of me when I'm up on the mic with people, you know. It's like, you know, because I look, you do the best work that you can in life, and you just kind of like open up and be like, okay, the vulnerability of like in a year from now, just discovering that Uyen is, you know, it's just another level of thinking that I never even got to really question and experience, right? And I find that a lot. Like when I listen back to my episodes, I'm like, oh my God, this is so cringy. But you know what? I just have to accept the growth that comes with it and not be so egotistical and just, you know, roll with it right now. But as I've, you know, researched more about your life and your work, I'm like, oh my God, this is not just about food. This is about something much, much bigger in your life, you know? And
Yeah, I mean, I have to give you so much credit for even doing this, because you know it's the courage of putting yourself out there, and then the courage of like, I mean, you know, people who broadcast, I think, have to do this sort of like self editing in this way that's very in the moment. Um, you know, it's like it's it's a special skill. I haven't been interviewed a ton, you know, at all. And just from my experience, when it's somebody who's like doing the question asking, that's like so much pressure, right? I just sort of like get to like draw from my experiences, but here you are having to like tie these threads together and stuff like that. So much
it's,
respect.
oh,
And
thank
you know,
you.
everybody visits stuff they did in the past. I think that's totally normal.
Thank you. It's frightening though, like you know, the growth, and it's incremental. It's tiny incremental steps to get better at this. It's like being a musician, and you like there's levels to playing the piano or singing. You know, it's just not what you hear on Lady Gaga is not just, you know, it's not just 1 or 2 years. It's like years of
Yeah.
layering skills and doing that. And one thing that I look forward to is talking with you, because I think about this. This is what makes it hopeful. Is actually seeing how you unfurl the trajectory of your mission in life. And now I do want to get to how you got to sort of where you are today with the work that you've done. And I want to get into the seed of where it came from, maybe perhaps high school, but I'm hearing it, you know, your father in Pleiku, but maybe get into more of like the practical side of, you know, when you were coming up, did you come into contact with anybody like a Cesar Chavez or somebody who inspired you?
Yeah. I I draw a lot of inspiration from my mom, actually. And you know, when we first came to America, we she I have to like go back to Vietnam again. Is she got her pharmacy degree in Vietnam um, right before 1975, and so um, you know, after that, she wasn't able to practice pharmaceuticals. or become a pharmacist, even though she had a degree. And so um, while my dad was like in prison and like after he got out, um, he wasn't necessarily able, like you're talking about, to gain a lot of economic opportunities. And my mom had basically like apprenticed with a toy maker that makes plastic press toys, like little cars, like
Wow.
little things like that.
Yeah.
And then eventually they were able to open up a small toy pressing factory. And so that was the environment I grew up in, is my parents researching like what are tiny plastic things that we can press, and then they would like do it and there'd just be like little balls of different colored plastics everywhere, and then they would make it and then they would sell it at Jalum, which is in, it's in Saigon area. But I remember going with them, just having these huge bags, on the back of our motorcycle. And it'd be like me, my dad, my mom, and huge bags, and just kind of being in that market environment. And that was, drew inspiration, I think, from that. And from there, they were able to expand their factory. But my mom was able to also teach my uncles the business, her brothers. And so then they sort of did their own toy making businesses in Vietnam, and still, and were able to kind of build, income for their families, et cetera, throughout the 90s and the 2000s
Are
as a
they still
result.
doing
But
that?
to a certain extent, but not really. One of my uncles has passed. My mom's like 72. One of my uncles has passed, and the other one lives in America now. But that kind of like factory still sort of exists to a certain extent, you know. But she was the one that built it. She was the youngest too in her family, and when we got to America, we started kind of like started over, and but there was at UCI was a teacher who was teaching classes so that pharmacists could get their equivalency degrees, because at that point America needed pharmacists, and so they were willing to accept degrees from other countries as long as you pass like the English proficiency tests like TOEFL and then the board exams. um, but that's like a lot of studying, and
Yeah.
this teacher was willing to do it for free and kind of like brought all these different Vietnamese pharmacists from all over the place in order to go there and learn. But it took years, but he like had the materials and everything for people. And so I remember us kind of like doing like garment work at home, where my mom would sew and like cut the pieces into the patterns and stuff, and we'd all cut threads off the clothes. But the whole time, it's just like, also at other times her face was just buried in all of these materials and stuff like that. And it took like maybe 6 or 7 years, um, in between of which they found like a tumor in her chest that they thought might be cancer. Like it was a very high chance of cancer. And so it was just like, this woman's just been through like
Yeah.
so many things. Like, even from, like she got shrapnel in the 50s because they were in the field. And then, this was not the war we call the Vietnam War here in the US, but this was, with the French. And she got shrapnel, and I think she was 3 or 4. And then they found she was doing an MRI in America, and her thigh really hurt, but of course she didn't say anything. And then after that was where they found out there was still a piece inside of her, decades later. But I guess all that to say that that it's just, I think there's a resilience to my family, but especially demonstrated through my mom's experience and her actions, that I've always kind of taken with me to be like, well, like you never know what's going to happen in life, but you have to
Yeah.
figure out how to just move forward. You have to figure out how to thrive in whatever environment you find yourself in. But she also just has this like huge heart where she'd just be willing to really do anything for anybody. And in return, like she's able to really just like make these huge asks of people where they will actually say yes, and that taught me a lot too, like kind of the beauty of like asking for help
Like
in order
what's an
to build.
example of it?
Oh, I don't like, um, like just the process of like trying to pool together money when you're not really bankable, you know, um, in order to, open up a business or like start to invest in property or to, like uh, pool together donations for things that happen like in like my dad's hometown or whatever. That she's somebody that is like a natural organizer in a way, like a family organizer, sort of a community organizer, somebody where like you you call on them to figure out how you're going to make it in America, where you're going to be able to stay, how do you find a job, etc. That's just somebody that like sort of pulls those threads together, and it's not necessarily her doing all of it because she's like 4'10", and not always in the best state of health, but something about the gravity of the ambition of what she feels she's capable of and her family's capable of and what our community's capable of, that I think sort of just brings other people in and would just be like, okay, well, like you helped me out back then when I really needed it, and now you're asking for something, and it might be like a bigger ask than anything anybody's ever asked me before, but I'm just going to try to get this done, and we'll get it done together. And I find those traits to be incredibly um, admirable for anyone. I think for a woman who grew up without indoor plumbing, without electricity in the Mekong Delta, to kind of like be here now and to have done all of the things she has in her life and to have gone through all of it. Excuse me. Kind of puts into perspective, I guess, like, like I'm capable of so much. Like I came from this.
It's a gift. It's a gift
Yeah.
from, from our moms and our dads that have gone through such horrific experiences. And unfortunately, I think today we in America, we grow up with none of those gifts, the gifts of hardship. And it's just making all of us go haywire. It's like we're not, it's like our ability to, I mean, I'm not talking about you and me, but I kind of, like my children and the
Mhm.
generations that don't have the hardships. I hope that they find other hardships, and I hope that, the struggle of being human is something that they have to contend with and make them stronger. But the gift of war, whether we are on wherever end you're on, the gift of being products of war is a special thing that you can't ask the universe for, or you can't want to be in that because it's a horrible, horrific place to be. But I think a lot of the outcomes of the Vietnamese refugees that lived through it, the fortunate ones that have made it through it, oftentimes, like your mom, they give just amazing gifts that allow you to see the society around you in a different way and move you in a different way to do bigger things for Mexicans in LA, right? I mean, or Americans in LA. It just transfers that energy into a very unique story that you've lived on a practical level.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, so you went to high school in like La Puente or West
I went to
Covina,
West Covina.
West Covina,
Yeah.
and in high school, you have to have plans to kind of like where are you going, and in your mind, I imagine your mother's a pharmacist and had that training, and did you buck that system? Did you go, I'm going another way, or were you like, okay, that makes sense, let me follow that path?
I it's funny being a queer kid going to school in the late 90s, which is I graduated high school in 2002. And and I guess everybody has, these like formative periods of their life, but I was deeply influenced by social justice work, kind of like when you grow up so kind of like outside of these norms, you realize that like being othered and being different um, often comes with a lot of risks. And I just always felt it in my bones. I'm also left-handed. I'm like queer,
Me
I'm like
too.
a
I'm left-handed
refugee.
too.
Hey, what's up? I'm like a refugee, I'm like English as a second language. And I never really quite felt like these systems, even though I was able to manipulate them, like academic systems and school and such, I always felt that they were incredibly unjust and that they really created classes of haves and have nots of privilege and justified it by, SAT scores or grades, and that so much of people's uh, real intelligence and real emotional intelligence was not being focused on, and that that I just somehow felt drawn to like being like, oh, there's so much inequality in the world, it's so unjust, like, and so I always felt drawn to like going into like politics or law at that point, and not into pharmacy. But I remember very clearly, and I think everybody that has lived long enough to remember does. But 9/11, 2001, um, uh, was my junior year of high school, and I can say that my life has not been the same since, like between that and, you know, again, the starting of these endless wars when, before that, it was like the Vietnam War, and then we lost that one. And then, we're just kind of engaging in these battles and stuff, but then kind of gets drawn out. And then, it's like that happened when I was in high school. And then when I was in college was, you know, the Iraq War and weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. And I I was arrested, for protesting that when I went to Berkeley. But I just felt drawn to these kind of causes. I did a lot of um, activism regarding affirmative action, and how I felt deep inside that like our college admission system was deeply flawed, and that folks who had the most advantages were getting in, and it was being justified in these ways that somehow they had more merit. And I just didn't think that was true. Um, and then Hurricane Katrina happened. Um, and and that really, like, I didn't know there were that many Vietnamese people in the Gulf Coast. I just had no idea. But just learning about it just sort of like took me to this place where I felt very compelled to act. Like, and at that point, it was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was just going down to film a documentary for an ethnic studies film class at Berkeley. and I wasn't even in the class. I was just like, had a passion for it. And so but I also spoke Vietnamese, And so my friends brought me down, and, kind of one thing after another, but I ended up getting independent study units and staying down there for over a year in New Orleans and East Biloxi, where I really kind of was, I think, more able to build this bridge between my passion for social justice and my Vietnamese American identity, in a way, with my progressive values. Because quite honestly, I felt like I was silencing myself so much in the company of other Vietnamese people because of my progressive politics when I was growing up, including just a lot of disagreement, in my own family.
Right.
That I was just exhausted. Like, I don't want to work in this community that one, won't accept me, and two, is so conservative as to support these awful causes and policies. But with Hurricane Katrina and the way it kind of just like brought us all together around, like, not just the Vietnam War, and not just homeland politics, and not just kind of like Republican versus Democrats, but this is like real people
That just need.
impacted,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like, we need to get stuff done, and they need to have a voice in how their communities rebuild, and they need to be able to have opportunities and access to the short-term recovery, but also the long-term redevelopment. And that's not negotiable, and everybody can agree on that. And we need to do it and organize it in a way where we're not just doing it like as the Vietnamese community, but these other communities impacted too, and to kind of build coalitions around ethnic communities, but also multi-issues like environment, economics, social justice. And I finally just felt like I could like bridge that gap with my Vietnamese identity. And I think that was really when I was like, okay, like, this can work. It's challenging, but I can't just hold this kind of Vietnamese community worksite at arm's length anymore, even though there were still so many inherent risks, of engaging in that community as sort of a queer progressive person. But yeah.
So when you finally get to the Gulf Coast and roll your sleeves up and you start really activating and doing the work down there, did you find that your identity, your queer identity, your Vietnamese identity, did any of that matter to the people, the Vietnamese community down there?
I don't, it's, I, it's interesting because in the Gulf Coast, there are multiple Vietnamese American communities,
Mm-hmm.
each with kind of their own settlement histories. And when I first came down after I did the film, and then like went back to Berkeley, and then came down again it's called the Young Tongue Fellowship, which I guess means something like without self, or like with, it was through an organization called NAVASA, National Association of Vietnamese American Service Agencies. But it was like a year fellowship, and I was first placed in New Orleans. And the New Orleans East community has such a special settlement history, but it was through kind of immigration, with like a senior housing center, but through the Catholic Church, much more specifically too, as to how a lot of those folks came. And those folks were also folks who came from communities in North Vietnam, and then in like 54 settled in South Vietnam, as Catholic communities.
Right.
And then, after 1975, we're kind of recruited as these Catholic Vietnamese American communities to go to New Orleans East, specifically in the New Orleans area. And so there, I stuck out like a sore thumb. Excuse me, that was okay. And
You stuck out
so,
like a sore thumb.
yeah, I stuck out like a sore thumb because I have a Southern Vietnamese accent when I speak Vietnamese, and folks there have a very specific Northern Vietnamese accent. I also, it's just such a close knit community. It's like everybody knows who everybody is, living within like these multiple blocks of each other. Like, and it's still one of the most clustered Vietnamese American communities I've ever been to, over Little Saigon, over other
Wow.
places. It's just concentrated and everyone knows each other. Everyone knows whose kids are whose, and so like I was clearly very much not from that community, but they really welcomed me, because at that point, like, people could use whatever help, and I wasn't coming in being like, I know what to do, and but I was just like, what do you all need? And then also, I have certain skills to be
Hmm.
able to, draft these things, and like to help organize this and that. And I tried to be as humble as I can coming into a community like that, because at that point they were also like scattered all across like the South and other parts of the country as well, because there was like no electricity.
Wow.
Everybody's house had been flooded in New Orleans East for like a month. And so, when all that goes down, it's not like anything's really salvageable. You have to tear everything out. It wasn't like it got flooded and then the flood waters receded,
Yeah.
which is what it did in, the French Quarter and other places too, but it was just the way the levees were. Like New Orleans East was just a fishbowl for weeks. Um, and so it was to kind of see how people were making do, and how the church, which I didn't really go to a lot, but went to a lot of mass when I was there, because that was sort of the central
Mm.
organizing body where people can learn about any news, or they can get access to resources, because other folks like the Red Cross and other people knew too, like, if you like want to provide services, you can like post up here, and then people will know where you are. And then they'd have like the big water tanks too, because water needed to be delivered. And so
You grew up
so
Buddhist,
yeah.
right?
What's that?
You grew up Buddhist?
I
Yeah.
did.
And I asked that because it's a very different culture. Northern 54 Buddhist Catholics are just it's a different. My mom is from that corner of the world, and Southern Buddhist, it's a different sort of way of thinking. And my father comes from that so they're very different cultures, and it's almost like the American North and the American South.
Yeah. And I didn't really actually even understand it very much until I was like in it, but I happened to be in it at a time when I think people were just like, you want to help, you're an extra set of helping hands, and you're not an asshole, like come on down, like I don't know that I would have been embraced quite like that
Coming in
otherwise,
cold.
but it was
Yeah.
just like there are times that give you perspective on what's really important and what the real priorities are, but I spent a few months there, and then I went to work in East Biloxi, which is where closer to where the eye of the storm actually went
Yeah.
through. Um, and it was like the level of destruction there was just for blocks, it's just completely demolished. Instead of these structures are still standing, but you see the flood lines is like just and I've always been that person who's like, okay, well, all this media attention and nonprofit and foundation attention is being all paid in New Orleans, and it was very important to me to kind of go to area on the news, but I knew was suffering or knew had issues that I could help with. And at that point, being bilingual and bicultural was probably the most important time it's ever been for me, and ever, before
Yeah.
that and since. is that having that bicultural, bilingual ability created these conditions where I was somehow more uniquely positioned to be able to kind of like help bring these things, these different people together, you know, at that time. And there, you know, they had a church, they also had a temple in Biloxi, and you know, folks were there for more, I think, economic reasons as to that pattern of settlement, because it was near like oyster factories, and it was like the shrimping industry, which people in New Orleans did as well, like, you know, part of the economics, but it just didn't have as much of like that history of settlement all the way from like before
Right.
1954. And I was like basically adopted by this like Vietnamese family when I was there, and I like lived in their house. And you know, they knew I was queer, and that was fine. And it was just like three sisters and the mom and the dad, and then one of the sisters had a kid. So it was just like, and the dad wasn't around a lot, so it was just like all of us women, you know. And they were,
Mm.
and and you know, they still call me sister, I still call them sister, we still keep in touch. And I just, you know, I just felt very much seen, you know, as like, this
You
is
know,
like
it's
the
so
first kind of group of people, of all Vietnamese people, that I've spent time with outside of my own family. And they're just
it's
like,
so
so
ironic listening to this story, because it's like you would think the West Coast, and with all of our progressive sort of our nature in on the West Coast, you would feel more at home, right? Or, you know, or seen or not othered, right? But in this uh enclave of Vietnamese, I would imagine they're very conservative, if they're church-going people, and you know, I can imagine them asking intrusive questions like, you know, sao con không có bạn, or you know, these questions
yeah.
that Vietnamese people ask, you know, and how did they make you feel so connected even to this day, being conservative Catholics and you know,
Well,
going
the
to
family
mass?
I lived with were Buddhist, just to be clear, in
Mm.
Mississippi. But, you know, um, I just think that when you're faced with these other priorities, that sort of like the sin of being queer sort of becomes more like these other, I don't know, like a lesser sin. I don't even know Catholicism enough
Yeah,
to be like
Buddhism,
really.
I think the Buddhist Vietnamese are different than the Catholic Vietnamese. They're just more Catholic Vietnamese, I think,
Yeah.
more
And
pressing with
so, but
this.
even like, you know, the, yeah, like the father of the church at that time, Mary Queen of Vietnam, no, he was very accepting of me, you know, and it meant a lot to me, you
Mm.
know. And and I think sometimes you see somebody in a leadership position where people come to consult with them on so many different things. And then to have somebody like that just be like, okay, like it's not like he's saying like, oh yeah, it's totally acceptable, but it was also not unacceptable. It was just like, okay, like this is a part of you, and you know, and you're working with us, and you know, we're going to work together and get these things done because this is what we need to do. And it was kind of, that was the attitude. And to be quite honest, the Southern hospitality thing we all hear about, it's so true, you
Really?
know. It's like you go there and people are just like, we're going to take you fishing, and then we're going to cut this up, and then we're going to bring two ducks so that we can do, you know, like this Vietnamese pizza thing where like you cook
Thịt
one
canh.
up, like the organs and everything, and then the other one is you have to get the fresh blood from another duck, and so that settles, and then you eat it like with bánh tráng, you know, like first time in my life I'd ever had that dish. It was delicious, but you need like two ducks to do that, you know. It's like a two duck game. And so it's like, and you know, just really just being like, oh, you need a place to stay, just come live with us for 9 months or more, you know, like that's just fine,
Beautiful. Yeah.
you know? And so yeah, I think that I think that I felt very, very embraced, and in return, when I left that experience after a little over a year and I came back, it really set my trajectory of being
Hmm.
like, I want to apply. I wanted to do a dual degree city planning, which I didn't even know existed until Hurricane Katrina, when all of these city planners, many of them really fucked up, like messed up how you're supposed to kind of go in and work with communities and not just look at topography maps and economic trends. Um, and um, Instead of like talking to real people, and I felt like I didn't realize how much these people had a role in dictating the ways that we live, both through design, both through economic policies, both through channeling where resources go, both through creating priorities for government. And so then I was just like fascinated by that as a career pathway after that, because it sort of brought together these very disparate parts of
Yeah.
my brain in a way, and sort of like integrates it into not just the built environment, but into kind of like policies and programs and actions. Um, but I still held on to that, like, I don't know, like I still wanted to like a law degree. So I went back and took my GREs and my LSATs. Actually, I studied for them while I was still living in the Gulf Coast. And so I was driving into New Orleans to like take like LSAT classes essentially from Biloxi like every week. Um, but then that really sort of like, it was a very formative experience for me. I think seeing so much inequality and seeing it happen to so many different types of people, like the native communities there, a lot of like the laborers who were brought in after to do the work in such like awful conditions. Not to mention that the the private utility company wouldn't turn on the electricity for the community in New Orleans East until that they could prove they had enough people coming back. Because, and it was like you're a utility, like you're like an essential service. You can't just like decide you don't want to turn back on the grid because you don't know if you're going to be able to make money. Like people aren't going to come back without electricity. Like just it was really like there were so many things that were made very clear to me
Yeah.
in the Gulf Coast, of like how decisions are made and how people are the ones that make them, and how the priorities of those people are often not aligned with the best interest of the people who live in those communities, and that was made abundantly clear to me during my time. And so anyways, I came back and I like did all this, and then I applied to these different schools. But I was accepted into MIT's city planning program, um, which and MIT does not have a law school. And so I applied to other dual degree programs that I got accepted into. But I really wanted to go there because of, the reputation they have of working, using a lot of different types of technologies, but also different types of analysis, but also kind of like certain professors known to kind of like really want to do stuff like on the ground,
Mm.
and in community and alongside with, and to collaborate and to innovate. And I also got a scholarship there, where then I also got like a graduate student research stipend, as well as like the scholarship to be able to attend, which to me was like mind blowing, because
Yeah.
the thought of being able to graduate from a program without being like in a huge
That.
student debt meant that I could do things that maybe I couldn't imagine I could do before because I wouldn't need to make the type of money. I really feel for people who like kind of have a lot of student debt. Like it just, gosh, you know what I mean? Like how it impacts so many other decisions you make after that. But anyway, so that was sort of the trip from the Gulf Coast to the city planning program at MIT.
One of my major questions, and it's hard for me to ask this question because I don't know how to articulate it correctly or like pinpoint the way, but the question is basically this. You have gone through a sort of a journey from the Gulf Coast to MIT to where you are today, and you could see the different pain points in managing a city, a restaurant, a community, and these decisions are made by human beings. And these human beings have uh, these different buttons that you push so they can gain, right? And so it's like this sort of game that we play uh, between the haves and the have-nots. Now, on an Amazon level company, there's a lot of this crazy shit happening, and it's happening in ways that are destroying the fabric of society as we speak right now. It's really deteriorating the the fabric of human beings. I think on a way that humanity has never seen before. Is there a way, just your opinion, that we can unfuck this? That's the best way I can ask the question.
What? Is there a way that we can unfuck this? Is such a good question. I'm just gonna like write that one down, keep it in my pocket. I mean, I it's so crazy, right? Like of like all the ways in which I thought maybe the 2020s were gonna go. Like it's been such a wild ride, and like um I I think that we're always gonna be struggling to try to unfuck stuff, and I think there's um a very human need to interact with people and to show care, whether these sort of like large corporations that monopolize our money and our time and our labor, whether it means that like we lose connection to each other, we lose the ability to benefit from each other and not just toil for it all to kind of go elsewhere, like whether like money and resources and attention can be recycled within kind of local communities. I that's I think where restaurants come in. I think that's kind of what restaurants aren't the only solution, something like, to make these decisions on what they're going to eat, and they have to do it like every day. They have to do it like multiple times a day, and it like food in Vietnam, like street food, it becomes this place where different people kind of come together, or even if they don't come together, they see somebody else post something on social media, and it kind of like reminds them of their culture, reminds them of comfort. And it is why I'm so attracted to this, like having kind of done these other like things, like worked for larger like universities and labor organizations and social justice organizations, and dealing on such these kind of like macro levels with the California Public Utilities Commission and the California Energy Commission and all of these acronyms, I felt like my path was to kind of apply these values, but to kind of do it in a space that would produce every day, that would create a place where somebody can go and get something every day, and it's something that they need every day to get to the next day. And it would be something that's affordable so that different types of people can come. That's why I love street food so much. Vietnamese street food is you just go there at night and you just see like the kids and they're sitting on the stool and like somebody maybe in a suit or something that looks very uncomfortable because it's too humid to be wearing a suit, sitting down, and then, you know, some other people, and then somebody comes by with like a karaoke machine, you know, and it's like just like that vibe I will never forget, and I hope never goes away, you know. And I think that's sort of like, it's not the anti-Amazon, but it is the on the other pole of what that like total monopolization and automation of life could look like, or like just like when you're just like in front of a screen all the time, is like to try to create space for that other pole where people have places that they can access, that they can return to regularly in real life, and that gives them like real food for comfort, so that we're not just taking like food pills. I don't know if food pills will be a thing in the future, you know, but like
Oh,
all
it's
of
already
these like,
here.
this
Yeah.
dystopian, yeah, exactly, like these kind of dystopian ways of which like we're going to become just totally disconnected from each other and become cogs, that I think restaurants are a place where we can prioritize so that our humanity is valued, you know, and our bodies are used for you know, to kind of get to the next day, but also it's eating is a very pleasurable experience, you know. Eating and drinking and sharing food, I think, is basically what most of my family did when we couldn't really talk about the hard topics, you know. So well,
That's a great answer. Because it's you know, I always think I think I live in brackish water when it comes to like capitalism and community, and you know, so I've one foot out, one foot in, but the feet are constantly, you know, doing a dance trying to figure out which way to go because of my capitalist background, you know, factories and restaurants and still in the food business, and trying to figure out how does this all play out, and how to kind of get away from the Amazon model, because I think it really is destructive. I do. On some level, it's like, I just know my heart, this is not the right direction for humanity. It can't be. You know, I ordered some headphones yesterday morning, and in the afternoon I got them. And I was like, oh my God, this feels so good, but it feels so wrong. You know, it's just so
I
wrong.
mean, it's just like, you know, like how long are we gonna like spend like, it's like there are like so many fires to put out all the time. And you know, when you like run a business, they're like literally like a food business, they're like literally fires to put out. And then there's like figurative ones, like metaphorical ones, I guess. Maybe it can like be a part of these menu options, but that we don't let it take over our lives. But that we also try to address the conditions of work, you know, at places like Amazon, um, where it's like, how do you get this shit done in this amount of time? Is it because people aren't able to take proper breaks, or that people aren't able to like interact as human beings, you know, or because, you know, your supply chain stuff is like impacting the environment in these like messed up ways, you know, like, so I think it's like, I see that this is happening. I'm using it for convenience because I'm putting out fires on my own, you know, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like there's no accountability for a company like that, you know, in terms of the treatment of its workers, the treatment of the environment, and then the treatment of competitors, you know.
Yeah. There's so many topics that I really want to get into, and I'm gonna find a way to get them all in right now. There's so many. I'm looking at my list. I'm like, I haven't even gone over 80% of the stuff that I wrote down, you know, the
How do we
electrical.
unfuck this? Was that your last question? Yeah, that was
Yes.
a great one to end on.
I gotta wake people up every now and then. I can't just keep this formal sort of. I've been accused of being boring sometimes because I keep it straight. But people who really know me, like when we ran into each other at the pool hall, I was
Yeah.
like, this is how I am. Like I'm
Yeah.
like a bubbly guy, and I get excited about things. And sometimes being on this podcast doesn't allow me to do that because the interviews are sort of serious with serious people, but I want to use bad language and curse and and be myself all the time. So then I hope that this next few minutes we'll get into that because I want to talk about. There's three things more that I want to talk to really, which is the electrical, the union stuff. The other thing I want to talk about is your fascination with pool. That was like the strangest thing to me because we met each other a few days before that at Uyens, some guy, the gin event, which that's another thing that I wanted to talk to is your relationship with Daniel Uyen from some guy in the Gulf Coast. So there's all these things that I want to talk about, and then there's the triple bottom line thing with the social justice, economic justice, and environmental sustainability. These are things that I really want to touch on and talk about. And so why don't we first talk about your fascination with pool? Because I feel like we're like in this energetic stage, and I want to. It's so random to bump into you at a pool
Uh,
hall in LA.
it started at a young age. Yeah, because in Vietnam we call it bia, and the
Yeah.
tables have no pockets. It's like the three balls, and I'm a nerd in this way, in that like I'm like a nerd, but I like the physicality of things. I'm like an applied nerd. I think that's why I like cooking as well. Um, but just from then, like I grew up and my uncle had a pool table, and in America, and while I didn't play it that much, it was always like fascinating to me. But I love being in an environment where you have like something to do, and sort of like there's competition, but there's also like all this strategy, and then you meet these like old cats or older cats who've been doing this a long time, who tell you stories about betting on pool games, and like
Wow.
different types of shots, like shots that angles people can see, ways in which things spin in one way to hit another. Like this is like physics, like, gosh, what is it called, like how spheres move through space. This is like astrophysics essentially, but it's pool on a table because these spheres are kind of hitting each other and colliding in different ways depending on the angle, and so there's just, and it's so frustrating because I can understand all that, but if my body doesn't
Mhm.
cooperate, then I don't make it. And it's like a very clear sort of like, you did it or you didn't, and then did you get the right lead for the next shot? And are you really thinking ahead multiple shots? And just being around people who think like that, and who are just very good. It's very humbling. I'm not very good at pool. I'm just like
Well,
really
let me
quiet.
tell the story of this situation because this is all very strange when you really think about it, you and me. So I don't go out like that. I don't go out to bars. That's just, I'm at a different place. I have two kids, and my wife and I never go out to these things. But she likes pool a lot more than I do. And I kind of grew up around a billiard. We had a family friend who had a billiard, and we would come over as a family to eat food at the billiard. Yeah, they would just serve us food, and we would sit at the table and eat food as kids, and we just play a little bit. But that's my extent of playing pool. So we get a call. I get a call, and these two, Dan Jung and Dan Va, these two friends of mine, asked me to come play pool, and I'm like, this is so strange. But I thought it was like actually at a pool hall, and I told my wife, and we have kids, and they went to bed, and we went out to play. But we show up to Little Joy, right? And we show up to Little
Mhm.
Joy, and I was like, I've been here before, many, many years ago. This is not a pool hall. So I walk in, and it's like, wait, it's a bar that happens to have one pool table. And it's all these
Yep.
guys playing pool. And I'm like, we put our name up on the board. I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna make it a night of hanging out with the two Dans, right? And then, we're about to leave, and I'm like, I want to play. It was my turn. My name was on the board. So I go over to the board and I look at the board and I see Uyen. I see a name, a Vietnamese name. I'm like, that's strange. I didn't see anything. I just saw your name on the board. And literally, when I looked at the name and I turned over to my left, you were standing right there. I was like, this is the most bizarre like thing that ever happened to me in the universe of like bizarreness. And you were standing there, and days before that we had hung out at Bao Nguyen's house. But it all comes together because we talked about coming on the podcast, and this whole idea of pool. Now we're talking about it, and now understanding more of how your connection with Daniel Nguyen is from the Gulf Coast. So that is like the segue. But it's like weird how all of these things sort of tie in, and the universe is just, it's a very strange place when you start to kind of roll in the direction that you're meant to roll into, and I feel like the work that I do has been like that from day one. Just these things, like the winds of the world show up at the pool halls that I'm showing up to, and everybody is so interconnected no matter what corner of the world they're on. And I'm starting to discover that there are people that live 15 minutes from me who all of my friends know about, and I've never heard their name. And then vice versa. My friends have told me about people, and this Vietnamese community, the diaspora, is a lot more connected than we can ever imagine.
Yeah, agreed. We're everywhere. We're
Yeah.
just like just like in very random places too.
Yeah.
And to just sort of like stick around and build a life. And now,
And now I want to ask you about Daniel Nguyen and how you met him. And it's strange that both of you are basically in the food business now.
yeah. I go back with Daniel a very long time. And you know, I was involved with a group of progressive Vietnamese Americans. This was like in the mid like 2000s when the politics in mainstream like Vietnamese America was it's still conservative, but it's much more how do I say this? It was much less welcoming to other perspectives, you know. Um, and so we just started to kind of self-organize and do kind of these like stuff where we would like organize in different places across the country, and just like it was to tell you the truth, some of it was talking about issues, some of it was talking about like potentially things we could do, but a lot of it was just like freaking group therapy, like all of us just sitting around just like hella traumatized people's quite sorry, I'm back. My phone was telling me I have 10% left, so
No worries.
But we're just sitting around, and it's just like, sometimes you sit in your trauma, and you can't talk about it to anybody because you can't talk to your family, and you can't talk to other people in the Vietnamese community because you haven't necessarily found people who share, some of your views, or you feel like you're at risk if you say it out loud, so you just keep it inside. And but anyways, through this process, we started a school called the Hai Ba Trưng School for Organizing, of which Daniel was a participant. Now I'm trying to remember if he was. I'm pretty sure he's a participant in this, by the way. Now I'm like, is this story true? I think it is. And then from there was when he learned about the work that was happening in New Orleans. He's through another student conference. Now I have like my thing mixed up, but essentially the Hai Ba Trưng School for Organizing is 3 days where we get young people to kind of like talk about like what it feels like to work in the Vietnamese community, but also to develop organizing skills. But anyways, fast forward, he goes to the Gulf Coast, to New Orleans to work, and he helped to start their hydroponics co-op, where these backyard farms that people had anyways and were thriving. They would like have a cooperative where like multiple families would go to one house and kind of build this stuff out, and then he would build connections with vendors, and not vendors, like be a vendor to restaurants in like the French Quarter and other places of these like amazing products. And then he would help to set the pricing so that,
Oh,
it would be something that could create economic value, because, the tendency is to undersell or to price lower, out of backyard farms out in New Orleans East. But he understand the value of the quality of what was being produced. And so he would go and kind of negotiate these prices with restaurants in the French Quarter and other kind of like fancy pants restaurants in New Orleans, which is like like the food capital or one of them of the United States. And I just I was just like, wow, this person's really committed to kind of doing these multiple things at the same time, and very innovative. And then Daniel moved to Vietnam for years, and and um, and then he sort of started distilling in his apartment, and doing these things. And when by the time I'd gotten to visit him in 2019, he still had these little stills around, but he just built out kind of like the
wow.
main site, and he was just lighting up the large still for the first time when I was there. But I see the ways in which he developed all of these relationships and been able to go to all of these different places, and like I see him, he's distilled all of these different like botanicals and fruit peels and other things from my culture, from our culture, that I'd never seen anybody do. And to put it into a product like gin, or like working on whiskeys and other things at that point too, is to like put it into these things that seem so like not Vietnamese, quote unquote, but when you taste it, you're just like, this is the this is like um this is the taste of our earth, like this is the taste of like our special plants that grow here. And like I feel that. And so I'm just, and then like, and from there, that was 2019, and then fast forward a few years, they're like distributing globally, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like what a great sort of inspiration, to like have this drive to build something from your Hanoi apartment, essentially, to build these other factories like up from scratch, like from like needing to clear the land all the way to getting the building erected, all the way to getting everything in. And then, like working with these different communities, and then working with a great staff, as far as I can tell, much smaller than I'm sure now, you know, and then now like we're just all so damn proud of him, right? Like I like every Vietnamese person I meet who's like knows about this distillery is just so damn proud, that like it's like our stuff and it's in there and it tastes amazing and it's like being recognized for what it is.
When I was first starting out with the podcast, I've had multiple people tell me that I should get Daniel on. Like many different from all over the world would tell me you should get this guy on. And then, I had a pre-interview call with him, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's super fascinating. And then I get him on, and we talk and we talk, and it's like I didn't taste the gin at the time, and I just listened to the essence of the intent of what he was going for, and you realize that there's something very special about Daniel, and it shows up in the product, and it becomes like this thing where what you just said, it's like the flavor profiles is the essence it comes from the earth and where we come from, that
Yeah.
flavor profile. And it's not just that, but it's like the visual branding, the artwork, the history, the everything that comes from the even etymology of his the brand some guy is all so well thought out. And
Yeah.
the beauty of all of this is that I remember you telling me at the at some guy when we had it at Uyens place, where you said, "Oh, I've known this guy for 16 years," and you know, in my mind, I'm like, it could go two ways. It could be like, oh, they just touched bases and they kept up in from high school or whatever, or you know, who knows, or they really have like this, you know, history coming out of the Gulf Coast. And today, hearing the two histories overlap because Daniel's come on the show before, and I understand like the world of the Vietnamese diaspora is just becoming to me more and more rich as the time goes on, because you know you we exist in different sectors. You know, some are in film, some are in food, some are in music, and we don't get to overlap quite often, but now it's becoming more you know,
Yeah.
people are just they're collaborating more across different disciplines. And you know, we see histories that come from 12, 15 years before are beginning to overlap a whole lot more now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a special bond between us, and maybe there are things that have like kept us apart,
Yeah.
in these ways, because there weren't maybe as many examples that we saw, but like we get to kind of like co-create this like new future as the Vietnamese diaspora together, and doing things as part of this like changing world anyways, and like we're like I think all people are resilient people. I think we've had multiple opportunities to prove our resilience, for better or worse.
Hmm.
And I think that there's something about that that bonds us together, and I find special community when I meet a Vietnamese person that's trying to do this or trying to do that. It's there is sort of like a sisterhood, brotherhood, siblinghood, for whatever it's
Yeah.
worth, of being like, all right, and then like when I came to Hanoi, like I'd never been there on a food related thing. And Daniel and you like took me
Mhm.
around and just um showed me like the coolest, most interesting bars, like the street food places I really needed to hit up, like just like brought me into there so that I could feel part of this kind of northern Vietnamese. Like we just compared all these words that I did not know, not because I don't speak Vietnamese, but because I don't speak kind of that northern thing, and 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 that's something that we've like continuously done with each other over the years. It's just like checked in, even though we're always living thousands of miles apart. Like that's always, except for a few moments in our life, we've always
Yeah.
lived thousands and thousands of miles apart, but we're still going to be connected.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So this idea of the triple bottom line, is that something you came up with, or is it just out there and you just brought it into, took it from the ether and just brought it into your lexicon?
I did not come up with that. And I, not that phrase, but I've always felt drawn, like when somebody is like, oh, well, we have to focus on this. I'll be like, well, I'm sorry. Hello.
Yeah.
So I thought I put it on do not disturb, but I think my mom has special
Yeah.
ways, but got it. Okay. um, I didn't come up with the triple bottom line phrase, but is always the way my mind has worked, and it validated me, I think,
Mm.
when I learned it, um, is that I always felt like people felt this need to like uncomplicate issues in order to work on them. But by doing that, I think we um, can't actually get things done because things are complicated and they involve multiple priorities and multiple interests. And if we can't learn how to clearly look at these different interests and priorities and try to get it all done at the same time, we don't have enough time to just like, let's work for 20 years on social justice and not think about economic justice and not think about the environment. Like, that's just like, to me, was an impossible task, but felt like that was like the way people were kind of going through it in a lot of ways, like in these different silos, thinking, well, if I work on this and somebody works on that and somebody else works on that, then together it'll all get done. And it just was not all getting done, like things like we're very much not anywhere near where we need to be in order to address the current climate problems we have and the sort of major issues that are now coming to a head. Our economics are so skewed in ways that people who have the least cannot access opportunities where they can kind of get out of this. And then people who have more are able to just,
Dominate more.
elevate themselves and dominate. And then, we live in a society that is still sexist, that's still racist, that still discriminates against queer people and trans people, that still discriminates against people based on their immigration status, that and this is connected to the economics, and this is connected to climate in ways that, folks who like live in places with high levels of pollution tend to be people of lower income and often immigrant or like Black, brown, Native American, like API communities. There's all this discrimination against like API people and harassment that I've experienced multiple times in my own life. But now the media is paying more attention to it, and we live in a world now that's also like totally integrated from a communication standpoint that makes all of this even more confusing, because it's like you see all of it happening at once, and then what do you do about it? And I was just trying to find a framework where I can at least like fit these pieces together and talk to people about like, what are programs we can do? What are ways that we can connect these different interest groups together so that we can fight for the same policies, and these policies can not just be like good jobs that are green jobs, but also accessible to communities who often haven't had this type of access. And so that kind of like work around environment, but environmental justice, to be specific, connected to local communities, is really something where I felt like, okay, this is a space where I can like bring like what I always felt were these issues that were of priority together, and try to do something with folks who may not have always worked together, but really feel compelled to now, because like sort of like this is the new reality. We can't just be in our silos. We can't just do one thing at a time anymore.
And do you feel at your restaurant this ecosystem is working? The triple bottom line idea, because it sounds like it's a work in progress. It's something that it's a model that you're building. Do you feel like you're making progress in this direction?
I I do, and then like I'm still trying to get all the numbers to balance out, and then then there are always like external factors, right? That's sort of the thing, is like everything, almost all my inventory costs 20 to 50% more now than it did even when I opened, which was just a little over a year ago, you know. And then it's sort of like these waves of, Delta after I opened, and then Omicron, and then all of these other things. So you're like, you have this model, right? Like these ideals, these goals, and then you just like contending with like staffing shortages, supply chain issues, needing to increase prices, but still not know if it's enough. And then I'm just like learning to operate my first business period,
Oh,
and so it's sort
wow.
of like my own capacity to be able to kind of meet these goals is not where it needs to be in order to do that. So it's certainly a work in progress, but at the same time, it's like, for me, like if I'm going to spend like 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week on anything, I'm going to spend it on this, like, because I'm passionate about it. And I feel like even if it's like not working the way I want it to, I'm still like creating economic opportunities for people. I'm still employing like 10 people, paying them decent wages with pooled tips. And even if like in the larger kind of like, is this a model and can it be like, adopted by other people? Like at the end of the day, I'm still like making affordable food. I'm still creating comfort. I'm still helping these people support themselves and their own families. I've been doing it for over a year. So in that case, like I think there's a lot of successes to be pointed at, but I think I have a long way to go to kind of, when I put my city planning hat on, to have a model that other people can adopt. But it's not a plug and play thing. So I feel like, at least in the ways where I feel like the values that I bring to the business have created an impact, at least on some people in the industry and some people outside of it, then yeah, like I'm just the ability to like have this conversation with you and have had like other conversations with other people, to have some articles written about this, to have folks approach me and be like, I really support what you're doing. Or like, I have people like handwrite me letters with like a check, like $50, $100, here, take this. Like, and like when I receive something like that, it's like, yeah, there's an impact there. You kind of like start impacting individuals, you start impacting a conversation. And whether like your specific business is the model, it's like maybe it inspires other people to act in the food industry or other industries. And I hope that from an impact level, that even though like this model is nowhere near where I want it to be sustainable, and probably going to take another year or two for me to even really know, quite honestly, because there's so many other factors involved, that I think there's been some impact of just entering these things into the conversation at a time where people are listening because of the pandemic and because of the other disruptions that are happening anyways, as people are trying to look at new ways or different ways of doing these things that have existed for millennia, food businesses.
When I hear your answer, I draw upon my own experience and how difficult it was for a guy who's all about making the money. And I never thought about the worker's point of view, and just coming up the way my mom and dad did it. It's just very basic, and we're just trying to make as much profit as we can without thinking about society. And the answer that you just gave me gives me hope in humanity, because it's not like you're just trying to, add some accents, some garnish to the business model of sustainability for the social sustainability of this, but you're really thinking about this like from an integrated perspective, and it's not just this is superficial work that you're doing. I think it's somebody at your level where you really understand it from a technical perspective on how to make this work, and it gives me a whole lot of hope, because it doesn't feel to me like you're doing this. It doesn't feel like you're doing this for let's see if this model works. It's like, no, let's do it, and whatever is spun off of it, information wise, inspiration wise, the model, we can take parts and bits of what you've learned and start to improve society and be inspired by improving the world around us. So it's a one of a kind person like you that could bring that, because I'm going to take this idea and maybe integrate a little bit, a point here or two. Let me raise the wages for my guys a little bit. But I'm not thinking of it like a holistic societal perspective the way you do. And I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Well, thank you. It's it's kind of like the way my mind has
Hmm.
always worked, and this is a small enough project initiative for me to be able to make decisions on that and kind of like tinker with it in a way, and a lot of people out there are doing this, and like, they don't. I'm just discovering that, like, I somehow now have more of a platform to talk about these things, but I think people are always like trying to do this, and I think more and more people are like gonna continue to figure out, like, how do we get to a point where, like, we can make money, treat people decently, build community, and not mess up our environment, like,
You,
it's
you know, uh, it's hard. It's a hard day and age to come to terms with numbers. Like, okay, so 1965, CEO pay was 20 to 1 on the average salary worker, right? 20 to 1. Today it's 350 to 1. Now, people with an education and people with an understanding on how these models are predicated on will go into business thinking, okay, I might not get 350 to 1 because I don't run a tech company, but on a restaurant level, at least I should be getting 50 to 1 with the education from MIT or whatever, right? Like, I'm just saying, like, on a basic level, somebody's like, I'm smart. I should be getting the 50 to 1 because I lead these things and I could be making more, potentially making more money. And I think that's sort of like the trap that we, as this, um, modern society, we've fallen into. We're like, we go, okay, well, they're making 350 to 1 at the tech level. Well, at least on the restaurant level, like a successful restaurant, we should be getting 50 to 1. And then so that distorts the way that people go into these business models. We don't tame it down. We don't clamp down on our expectations or what we're doing for society. We're just like, how can we gouge, this free market? And I think that's the conversation that is hard to have, even for a guy like me. I'm like adjacent, woke adjacent. I'm woke adjacent, but my muscles,
slightly sleepy, like, what's
yes, slightly sleepy. Woke adjacent, but my muscles can't carry out the reps. I just can't do it because I come from this like old school sleepy, slightly sleepy, no, not heavily sleeping mentality. And it's very hard to change the way I look at it because it's just ingrained in me and I just want to progress in the way that I'm profiting more, right? Not helping society more. And it's just like it's getting worse every day, I feel.
I I mean, I wouldn't think that about you, or quite honestly, like, anybody. I think a lot of people out there are just trying to just do things, and like kind of like support their families and live to the next day, and then they're following these like examples of what they've seen before, and so yeah, it's like hard for me to even like, a lot of people tell me I need to like be better at like promoting myself and like what we do, but I think it's like something about like the ways people find you and become attracted to certain ideas, and once they do that, they internalize it and adopt it more.
Mm.
Whereas if I feel like I'm out there like proselytizing like this stuff and being like, you should do this, you should do that. Like, just like people don't want to be told what they should
Right.
be doing or not be doing. But I feel like through kind of just like doing what I'm doing, sharing why we're doing what we're doing,
More
you
sticky.
know, sharing the values, sharing the mission is how I think of like it sort of attracts people to it. And then that's how they sort of internalize it and adopt it and want to apply it in their own lives. You know, and maybe that's a slower moving thing and maybe ain't nobody got the time for that, but at least
Yeah.
like a little bit a year into doing what I'm doing now, you know, like I see us having this conversation, you know, like and I see that it's sort of like people have their own journeys of kind of getting to the places where they feel like how they want to live their values and express them in their lives through all of the different things they do, whether in their business, with their families, you know, with their friends, like in their
Hmm.
community. And I think a part of it is really like just like getting us on the same like similar levels of like, okay, what are our values and what are our priorities? And it's not even about food anymore, you know.
Right.
And that's really the conversation that I love to like have with people. And like I over explain on that stuff sometimes, you know, being like, this is like what it's about, you know, like the deeper stuff about like treating people decently, about providing them with enough resources to support themselves and their families, and to be able to like have like fresh and flavorful food that is from like my culture that I'm very proud of, that I don't want pe- people to misunderstand, and I don't want it to be um, watered down to a certain extent, you know. So I gotta like stand up for it.
You know, listening to you talk the last 2 hours, I think about like right now how amazing the journey of like where we are sitting right now, you and I having a conversation, but the early days of this husband and wife, they were like cooking out of their house. And I was called, and I've known this husband and wife for a long time before they started this thing out of their backyard or their apartment building. And I rolled into it and had the wonderful food. It was out of the backyard and was, called their friends over, and we ate there, and we had a great time, and we would run into different people throughout the city, and Win Tran and T, right? And I remember, and I had known Win for years before that. And, they did this thing, and it was just like, whoa, this is pretty crazy. And then reading about you working at Button Mash in their kitchen, and then, knowing Kim from Cassia, and, just the kitchens that you've worked for, and, these Vietnamese Americans that are the fabric of the Los Angeles community. And it's just like now we're sitting here talking about things that are not even, it's not even like really about the food. It's what you said. It's bigger than that. It's like things that are like um moving the fabric of justice, I feel like. And I want to thank you for that work, and thank you for being who you are, and thinking the way you do to improve um, the people that work in your world, because that it's such an important thing that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do too, Ken. It's really, it's so nice to be able to elevate different voices from people in our community. And it's like brings me it's like a specific source of pride, when you see these people working across all these different industries and doing these amazing things, and then having the opportunity to like kind of sit down and have an in-depth conversation about us as well, in our community, this is the first one of its kind I've had since I've opened the restaurant. So that's been
Oh,
really nice.
that's awesome. I'm glad to
Yeah.
be a part of it, and I want to see that trajectory to go from like that apartment building with Win Tran and T Tran, and then it leads up to something like, their Button Mash kitchen. Somebody works there, and then that person now is like part of a social movement, and just the early days of that social movement. You're a year into the project that you're working on, and to see where this goes in the next few years is so exciting and hopeful for like humanity on not just the Vietnamese community, but like humanity to rethink, because you could be writing different policies for, you know, society in a few years based on your experience, and then we can revisit that on a podcast. And, you know, and I got to really hear the roots of like that kind of activism right here. So thank you so much for spending the time with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Wayne, we'll talk soon.
All right. Talk soon. Bye,
Okay.
Ken.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcast. Thanks again for listening.